7 important factors that influence the buying decision of a consumer. How and why do people decide to buy something? Well, this is a hard question to answer because there are so many different kinds of buyers. Some people buy on whim, while others have a very complicated system and do a lot of research before making a purchase. Even though these different types of buyers make decisions about what to buy in different ways, there are 7 important things that affect all of them. Let's talk about the 7 most important things that affect a consumer's choice to buy. Important factors that influence the buying decision. 1. Economic factor. The economic factor is the most important and comes first on this list. This is the most important part of any choice to buy. Why? Because people can't buy things they can't pay for. The need for a product doesn't matter either. What's most important is how much it costs. 2. Functional factor. The only thing that matters is what the customer needs and what makes the most sense and is in their best interest. This one thing is also a very important part of the choice to buy. 3. Marketing mix factors. The marketing mix is made up of 4 parts: the product, the price, the way it is promoted, and where it is sold. Each of these parts has an effect on how customers buy things, either directly or indirectly. Consumers think about a lot of things, like how the product works, how much it costs, whether it's available where they want it to be, and much more. 4. Personal factors. The consumer's age, job, way of life, social and economic standing, and gender are all personal factors. These things can affect a consumer's decision to buy on their own or as a whole. 5. Psychological factor. When it comes to psychological factors, there are 4 important things that affect how a person makes a purchase: perception, motivation, learning, views, and attitudes. 6. Social factors. Referral groups, family, and social status are all examples of social factors. The way people buy things is also affected by these things. In turn, these factors show a constant and strong flow that helps people learn different ways to value spending. 7. Cultural factors. The way a customer decides what to buy is slightly affected by cultural factors. Since each person lives in a complex social and cultural environment, the overall cultural context in which they live and grow can directly or indirectly affect the kinds of goods or services they want to use. Some examples of these cultural factors are race and religion, custom, caste, and morals. Can you now answer the following question? Which factor is described as the most important and comes first on the list of important factors that influence a consumer's buying decision? A. Functional factor. B. Marketing mix factors. C. Economic factor. D. Psychological factor. Write the answers in the comments section below. Culture has a big effect on how and what a person thinks and does. Because it has such a big effect on how people see the world, their place in it, and how they make decisions, it usually plays a role in how and why we buy things. Sometimes it's easy to see how society affects how people buy things. It's easy to understand why some people don't buy certain things, like alcohol or meat, because their culture says they shouldn't, or because their culture likes a certain style of clothes. Cultural behaviors, like the size of a household or the role of women in running a household, also affect who gets what and how much. But some are less obvious. The way a society views time, whether it tends to focus on the past, the present, or the future, seems to have an effect on trust and social interaction when shopping online. Of course, people have different personalities, and part of that difference is how much they take on board the influences of their society. Indian consumers tend to care more about their families than Western consumers, but that doesn't mean that there aren't Indian consumers who buy things based on their own needs, or that there aren't Western consumers who think in groups. Culture never really goes away, though. If someone breaks a traditional rule, their larger social group will punish them, whether they choose to give in or not. People are rarely not affected by this effect, and it will change how they act. Culture is, in some ways, just what comes easily to a person, what fits with their values and beliefs, and what they see other people doing. Culture has an effect on what feels right, normal, and good. When retailers ask customers to go against the flow of society, they make it harder for customers to choose their services. Most of the time, it's better to make it easy for customers to choose your product if it fits into their cultural comfort zone. Cultural elements. So, what cultural factors are likely to affect how people buy? Cultural experts have looked at a lot of different parts of culture over the years. These include, in particular, youth orientation, long-term versus short-term orientation, also called time orientation, masculinity versus femininity, the power distance index, individualism versus collectivism, indulgence versus restraint, and doubt avoidance. Researchers have looked into how each of these aspects of society affects how people act and how to best handle this. Scientists have done some interesting research on other parts of culture. A professor at the University of Hong Kong studied how the Asian value of saving face pushes even people with low incomes to buy expensive brands. How face affects consumption. A study written by Lai found that social prestige and social esteem affect what people choose to buy. In another study, researchers looked at how the culture of people in different Western and Asian markets affected how often they bought things on a whim. One thing the study found was that Asian consumers bought less on whim as they got older, but this didn't change for Western consumers. Researchers thought that cultural factors, like a tendency to avoid taking risks, were at play in why people buy things on whim. Culture can show up in ways that aren't obvious. For example, a culture's view of time can be seen in how it deals with lateness and inefficiency, and how people in that culture handle their own time. In places like India, where time is based on the past, people are often very accepting of being very late, like when a train is hours late. There are also some cultures, usually small tribal ones with traditional and fairly simple ways of life, that don't really have a sense of time. The way people in these countries talk about time tends to reflect how they feel about it, and this has an effect on how they work. Understanding things like this can be the key to understanding customers in these areas and getting along well with them. Marketing impact. There are many great examples of marketing that works with cultural values and shows respect for them. Marketing for motorbikes is a good subject to study. In the West, motorbikes are often seen as the most individual object, and the marketing messages that go along with them fit into the culture that encourages and rewards self-fulfillment. But if you go to a society that values community more, you'll find that motorbikes are sold in a very different way. Western bikers might think the idea of a family motorbike is silly, but it makes sense in a more collectivist, family-focused Asian market like Thailand. In this culture, people are more likely to buy things based on how much they help their family or social group than on how much they help them as a person. This is something that marketing needs to take into account. It's really hard to think like someone from a completely different culture, especially for brand managers who want to change the way a new crowd buys things. When you enter a new market, one way to start a journey of learning is to understand the basics of the culture. There has been a lot of study in this area, but it is still very hard to turn academic research into insights that your brand can use. It's the reason why so many well-known brands have failed to break into new areas.